when I used to be the pastor of a church. I was doing a funeral, and after the funeral service was finished, we were going out to the graveside. And so we had a lot of people lined up, as you know, behind the hearse. And I was sitting in the hearse with the funeral director, and we were headed out to this cemetery way out in the country. Well, the funeral director had just gotten a new Garmin GPS system. Now, this was before iPhones and other phones that had the maps programs on our phones. This was a Garmin, and he paid several $100s for it. And he was so excited because it had voice directions, and he was just bubbling with enthusiasm. So as we went out to this little cemetery way out in the country, we were listening to the directions: turn left, turn right, whatever. And we had a big string of cars behind us. So as we were getting further and further out in the country, and we were listening to these directions, the Garmin machine told us to turn to the right, and we had arrived at our destination. Well, we looked, and there was nothing but a field. A big field with some trees in the background, certainly not a cemetery. And he was all flustered. And we wondered what was going on. Well, finally, just a few cars back, a guy jumped out of a pickup truck and came running up to the hearse and said he'd been to the cemetery before, and you had to go turn left way back where we had gone by. So we turned around, and all the cars followed behind us, and we went to the cemetery. And of course, I laughed and laughed and had to make fun of this guy, and he was just petrified because his expensive device failed to work. GPS systems, or global positioning systems, are really interesting. They're based on space-based satellites. These satellites, there's at least over 30 of those satellites continually broadcasting their orbital position and the exact time that they're at that position. They do this on radio frequencies, and that signal is received by antennas along with at least 3 other satellites, then processed in your GPS to compute your location. So the GPS system tells you where you are and guides you to where you want to go. And then you interface with that system through the apps on your phones, whether it's Google Maps, Apple Maps, some of you may use Waze. And there's over 20 different kinds of maps interfaces with this GPS system. But if you've used GPS on your phone or any other device, you know that they're not always perfect. There have been many complaints about the GPS. I remember one time, not long ago, I was out in Butte, Montana, taking my daughter out there to do her work with AmeriCorps. And we were trying to find a location, and the GPS, the phone app, kept telling us to go around in a circle. So we kept going in the circle. And finally, after 2 or 3 times, we just struck out on our own and let the GPS find us again. Sometimes the GPS does not show you the quickest or the most efficient route. And sometimes if you make a wrong turn, it will often redirect you back to the original route, even if a new route would be shorter. Some people wish that there was more social media, a social media sharing function in GPS programs or apps. And of course, the GPS can drain your phone battery. Now, I'm not telling you this because I want to promote GPS or a particular phone. This proves to me to be a metaphor of my own life. I've used a variety of systems to determine where I should be in my life or where I should be going. And often those systems have proved to be faulty and not quite what I wanted. I've used jobs or careers as the system to tell me where I should go to be happy in my life. I've relied on unhealthy romances or relationships, religions, hobbies, drugs and alcohol, or activities of various kinds. And these very much reflected in many ways those limitations of the GPS systems. Sometimes they didn't show me the best way to get to where I wanted to go. Sometimes if I tried to get off of the system, it would direct me back to the same place I was before. And I would often isolate myself from social contacts because I was so focused on a particular way of envisioning or living my life. And sometimes these systems that I used drained my batteries. They drained me. So indeed, then, this GPS system, this system of guidance or direction that is a metaphor for my life, my own attempt to grab onto something that would show me how to live, has often proved to be faulty. But that doesn't mean that I don't believe that there is a way to find guidance or direction in my life and in the way that I live. Some time ago, I read a book, and I know I've mentioned this here before, but let me mention it again, a book by Maxwell Maltz, Dr. Maxwell Maltz, and the book was called Psycho-Cybernetics, first published in 1960. It's an interesting book. A lot of it I didn't find all that interesting or enthralling, but he did have a certain point that I thought was really good. He talked about our human lives like a missile that's being fired from one location to another. And he said that we typically think of this missile being fired from one spot, going over straight in a straight line to the target area. But the reality is that no missile does that. The missile is constantly going off track. And so there are internal mechanisms in a missile that bring it back to its proper direction or proper track. Sometimes there are influences from outside the missile itself. Sometimes there are internal aspects that cause the missile to go off course, but there is this internal guidance system that brings it back on point. And I found in my own life, and listening to other people talk about their own lives too, that many of us have experienced that or experienced life that way. That we have failed to listen to that inner voice. Sometimes we fail to listen to that inner knowledge or wisdom that we have because we're relying on a guidance system that doesn't quite work. It doesn't quite fit. And it throws us off track. And much of our lives may even involve trying to come back to what we know inside is good for us, is right for us, and provides us with a meaningful and purposeful life. So, what is it, though, that can keep us or get us in touch with that inner guidance system, with that sense of knowing what we need in our lives or what we want in our lives? Well, I propose that it's the power of our imagination. Our imagination. Let me read you 3 quotes from Albert Einstein. Einstein said, "The true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. Your imagination is everything. It's the preview of life's coming attractions." The imagination. Now, I'm not talking about manifestation. Now, manifestation, if some of you are maybe aware of it, this idea that if you just think about or visualize what you want, it'll come into your life by some sort of magic. Now, if you're a proponent of that, I don't mean well, I'm not. But I think there is something to visioning or imagining what you want in your life. But it's more than that. We're not talking about manifestation. We're talking about an imagination that fuels our spirit and urges us to chase an innate vision. Knowledge helps us play by the rules, but imagination helps us break through. Knowledge provides us with information, but imagination taps into the potentials, the possibilities that our inner guidance system wants to guide us to. Imagination, as the foundation of our actions today, determines how life unfolds tomorrow. Many years ago, when I was going through one of the crises in my life that I've experienced, I found that I was not very happy with the kind of work that I was doing. So I started going to a career counselor, a very interesting guy. And he suggested that I sit down and imagine what kind of job I wanted to have. He said, imagine what it would be like to get up in the morning. Where would I go? Where would my place of employment be? And at the time, I should mention, I was in outside sales. So I was driving a lot all over the state of Indiana, excuse me, and Western Ohio. And so he said, just imagine, where are you? What are you doing? What's the setting? And I thought about what I would like to do is I would like to have an office that I would go to every day that was filled with bookshelves, filled with books of various kinds, and that I would use these books to try to gain some sort of wisdom and share that wisdom with other people. I had no idea what that would mean for me. But I remember one day when I was at work, sitting in my office filled with bookshelves and books in a church, reading and sharing what I was learning, trying to assist other people as they struggled with their lives. I thought back over that conversation. I thought, by God, it happened. Now, it didn't just happen because of my imagination, but because I began to imagine, what would I have to do? What would I have to do in my life? What would I have to pursue? What would I have to kind of push away from my life that would allow me to get to that place? And that required both imagination and action. So what I think then is, in order to access that inner guidance system, that inner self, that part of us that knows what we want, but it gets covered up by all the responsibilities that have either been put upon us or that we have taken upon ourselves, we can't get to it. We can't get to that inner knowing, that inner knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes. Once again, I don't know about you, but I'm not perfect. Well, in fact, I do know about you. You're not perfect and I'm not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to think, this is what I want. And we go to it and find out this is not what I want, and it's really bad. That's part of what it is to be a human. And as the prose poem said, we need to be gentle with ourselves. But at the same time, if we look inside ourselves, using our imagination, what would our life be like? What could my life be like? And to imagine and to vision what our lives could be like. So there are there are 4 steps necessary to get to where we may want to be, where we think would be good for us. First of all, of course, we have to assess our current situation. Is our situation that bad? Are there things about it that are good? Are there things that maybe we can put up with because the overall good is so much worthwhile that it's okay that we do it? What is it about our lives that are unsatisfying? What is it about what we do each day or what we do regularly? Or what about those things that come upon us? What about them that is so harmful or keeps us from being the kind of people that we want to be and know that we can be? So assessment becomes very important to understand where we are right now. And the next step is to utilize that power of imagination, to vision, to project into the future. What is it that we'd like to see our life look like? A certain aspect of our life, maybe just that is what we need to think about. Maybe something in a certain part of our life isn't quite working. Well, what would it look like if it was working? What about our lives that we're living now need to change in order to be what we want them to be or want it to be? So we have to utilize and spark our imagination, to vision, to project what it is that we would like to experience in our lives. The third step is to identify those things that stand as barriers between where we are now and where our vision takes us, or where we want our vision to take us, where we want our lives to take us. What are those things that we need to start doing? And what are the things that we need to stop doing? What do we need to bring into our lives? And what do we need to exclude from our lives? We need to identify all those things that stand between our current assessment of our lives and the vision that we have for what life could be like. And when we identify all those factors, all those things that we think need to be changed or need to be brought in or need to be eliminated, then the fourth and final step is to act. To begin to project out what it is that I need to do and when can I do it and how do I start and when will I start. So a couple of years ago, I decided I was going to lose weight. So I knew where I was, I knew where I wanted to be, and I knew what I needed to do to get there. I'm still working on it. It's not finished yet. One day I'll walk in here and you'll think, who is that guy? And I'll be slim and trim. But until then, I'm working on it. And I'm thinking about cookies in my life or out of my life. Well, occasionally. The holidays, forget it, But think about other things, relationships. Relationships that I thought was providing me a place, a system by which I could define my life or understand and experience my life. Sometimes they didn't work out. So I had to eliminate those. Even in religion, that little office that I enjoyed so much with all the books, I thought this is the place. And yes, it did provide me with good things, but I knew that this was not the system. This is not the place I wanted to be positioned in the world. And sometimes that doesn't come right away, but it involves that self-assessment as not just a one-time situation or one-time act, but a continuing way to think about our lives, assessing our lives as they are. Are they providing us with the place that we want to be in the world? And where would we better be served to be? So we assess, we vision, we identify, and then we act. There's a lot to it. It's easy to put it all down on a sheet of paper. It's harder to do it. It can be painful. It can upend one's life. But if it's the right move, if it's the right repositioning, you know what happens in your GPS, right? You're supposed to go this way, but then you go the other way and it says rerouting, and it gets you back on track to where you're supposed to go if it's working correctly. And sometimes we have to do that. We have to reroute and find out where we've gone off so that we can get back on. And that global positioning then is our own internal awareness and knowing that sometimes is hard to access. So my hope for you is that, and for me, is that we may imagine our best possible life at the beginning here of 2022. May we discover optimism about our lives and discover ways to make a world a better place, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. There you go.